Hey guys, this is GameCat. Welcome to a new Pokemon Trading Card Game Online series, hopefully. Fingers crossed at the very least. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to call this yet. You'll have seen it in the title already. Probably something like Versus Deck Showcase, because that's pretty much what it is. And, well, there's been a couple of really cool things added to this game since I last played it. One of them was in the trade system. It's a lot easier to find cards that you're actually looking for now, because you can search for only trades that have the card or the name of the card you're after, rather than just finding all the ones that want it, like Shaman, you know. And the other one was basically having a feature where you can you can show your opponent your deck after the game, basically. I imagine if you turn that feature off, then you can't ever see what your opponent has, even if they have it switched on. But basically, there's been a lot of really cool games that I've played where after the match I've been able to see exactly how the opponent's deck was built, and it's really cool for getting ideas on stuff. Because I haven't made too many decks, mostly because deck building is really kind of hard to do, and really it's a case of finding templates and stuff that work for a base for me. Like, even if I know exactly what Pokemon I want to base a deck around, I find it really hard to build like the trainers and all of that stuff into it. But with this new feature, I don't necessarily have to build all the decks myself with stuff. What I can do is, if I play a really cool game with a deck or against a deck, and I can see what it's all about, basically I can do a sort of showcasing here. I think it'd be really good to have some sort of discussion going with things here. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the ideas of the deck and why you would include certain cards, or, you know, the idea behind certain things with that. I won't necessarily be playing with these decks first, because let's be honest, I have a lot of other stuff that I want to do, and I have my own decks to be playing. But I will still basically look at the problems I see with the deck and any ways that I can think of fixing them. And I will have an edited version of the deck as well that I can show. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the first deck that I want to do this for, which, as you've been seeing here, is Garchomp. So this Garchomp is super cool. It's one of the new Breakpoint cards, and it's basically the reason I'm showing this deck off first, even though I have other ones I could show, is because it is a Breakpoint card. So I actually haven't built a deck using the new Breakpoint Pokemon yet. So yeah, there aren't too many which are super amazing. Garchomp is one of the ones that I think has the potential to be, though. So let's have a look at why. It's essentially a stage 2 attacker, which in this day and age is normally a death sentence for Pokemon. Any stage 2 that you are focusing on attacking with is usually not going to perform very well, but Garchomp has several advantages that actually make it work more than most. The first one is that its entire line is fighting type now. So unlike the dragon type one that we had before, the fighting type has got a lot more natural support. So we have all sorts of access to stuff like Karina, so you can search out fighting Pokemon and items. You have access to strong energy, so that you can do 20 more damage with all of your attacks. You have access to fighting stadiums, so that your fighting types do 20 more damage to EXs. And you also have access to Focus Sash, where the fighting types don't ever get one shot, and instead you have 10 HP left and you discard the tool. So lots of high tier advantages to that. Karina works nicely with stage 2 fighting types in particular, because you get to search out rare candy as well as the stage 2 that you are looking for. So if you have a Gibble start, then you can search for Garchomp and rare candy on turn 2, and you can instantly get it out. So that's pretty great. But of course the stage 2 attacker is nothing without actual attacks to go for, so let's take a look at those real quick. They're both extremely good. Turbo Assault is an amazing first attack. 60 damage for one fighting is actually really solid, even for like stage 2s and stuff. Most stage 2s don't hit that sort of hard, so for such few energy. It's actually really surprising that way. There have been, of course, more damaging attacks in the past, but they tend to have a lot of conditions on them. Stuff like Empoleon's attack order from the previous format. Basically, in expanded you could hit higher, but 60 for 1 with energy acceleration is even better. That's just kinda great. But this energy acceleration is the best energy accelerator I have ever seen in a single card. You could argue Manectric, but for 1 energy, this is the best energy acceleration attack I've ever seen. Let's just put it that way. So, any energy type includes special energy. There are very few ways of getting special energy back from the discard in this game right now, as has always been the case really, but this is one of them. So those strong energy, if they get enhanced hammered, then you can get it back with Turbo Assault. But doesn't just end there, because you can also use that to get the energy onto Garchomp itself. So it's super good, because you only need the 1 energy. Even if you don't get an attachment, say turn 1 or turn 2, you can, if you get an energy in the discard, you can just Turbo Assault it, and you can have 2 energy for your next attack, and you'll be able to use the second attack, which is also pretty good. This is where the real meat comes in. Garchomp is extremely good against EX decks, because when you're fighting against Pokemon EX, you do 160 damage with its second attack for just 2 energy. Note that most of the time one of those energy is probably going to be a strong energy, so that is 180 damage. You have access once again to the Fighting Stadium, which for EX attacks you can end up hitting 200 damage if you have a strong energy, and you have access to Muscle Band whenever you're not using Focus Sash, so you can add another 20 damage to that, and you can actually start hitting the sort of numbers that knock out even Mega Pokemon in one hit, including the really bulky ones like Gyarados at 240 HP. It's kind of absurd. It's, of course, the Bite Off is also extremely good against Shaman, so this deck does run 2 Lysander. I think most decks do tend to run 2 Lysander, except mine, because I'm usually in the consistency over this sort of camp. Like, I tend to be more unlucky, let's say, when it comes to drawing, so I usually skip 1 Lysander for another draw support, but most decks will play 2, and Garchomp works really well with that, because if the opponent plays Shaman to set up and draw more cards, then you can just Lysander out the Shaman and knock it out for 2 energy, take 2 prizes, and if you've got Focus Sash on you, you generally survive the next hit too. It's pretty good. Of course, Garchomp itself has another nice strength in that it has no retreat cost, which makes it extremely powerful for just switching in and out. You can easily avoid letting your opponent take a knockout if they can't one-shot you. Obvious disadvantage to that is that it only has 130 HP, which as a stage 2 is abysmal. We've seen obviously basics can have that. The basic Yveltal has that. Yveltal 130 HP, not a problem. And that's just terrible. Most stage 2s nowadays have 150 HP. Quite a lot of them will have 140 if they're like support based stuff. But the bulkier ones like Gallade have 150, and that is also an attacker, which is pretty great in its own right. Unfortunately not so good for Garchomp, which is kind of where the problem with this deck lies. You're a little bit reliant on Focus Sash, because Garchomp doesn't generally live 1 hit from most decks. So yeah, it's a bit of an issue. However, there is a Pokemon that does survive 1 hit for most attacks, and that is Lucario. So this deck only plays 1 Lucario because it's really focusing on the fact that you are using a non-EX attacker. Garchomp only gives up 1 prize when it gets knocked out, Lucario obviously gives up 2, so this deck really avoids playing too many of this type of attacker, right? Yeah, so getting caught up myself there. Yeah, it only has 1 Pokemon that gives up 2 prizes, so that's pretty cool. Lucario itself actually does have the Corkscrew Smash effect. It's not as good as Landorus overall, because Landorus of course hit for 30 plus 30 with its first attack, but Lucario still hits for 30 on the first turn, which is nice. And of course it gets strong energy, it gets potentially Focus Sash, you can Muscle Band it up. Fighting Stadium works with EXs as well as non-EXs, so against an EX attacker, Lucario still does more damage. And Corkscrew Smash is really good for a deck like this, because you can draw a lot more cards, which quite a lot of the time you will end up running your hand fairly low with a deck like this, because it really doesn't have that many draw cards, and we'll get into that in a bit, because that's something I'm a bit sketchy on. But yeah, Corkscrew Smash, very good attack, and Lucario just tends to absorb 1 hit very easily, and goes from there. Of course, I did kind of mention the draw support is a little bit weak. Gible does have an effect to allow you to draw, but you have to discard a card from your hand to do this, and it's an attack, so you don't even get to use those 2 cards until the opponent's had a turn. That is very bad against something that could item lock you, like Trevenant or Seismitoad. So you do have to be careful of that if you are trying to use Gible. Of course, Gible is also one of your pieces to your attacking puzzle, and it only has 60 HP, so it's super easy to knock out. Don't really want to be using Never Enough if you can avoid it. But to complement the draw power, we do have Octillery. Most decks will run 2 Shaman. This deck doesn't run any Shaman, and instead just runs the Octillery here. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that this deck doesn't run any Ultra Ball, so there are no ways of searching out the Shaman if it was to play them. Karina only searches out fighting Pokemon, Level Ball doesn't search anything that's got over 90 HP. Octillery kind of falls exactly into that 90 HP, which is good. It's also reusable. So long as this thing stays on your bench, you can draw up to 5 every turn at any point during the turn, so you can play out some cards, then draw to 5, then maybe play another supporter like Karina or whatever you want to play, and it's generally pretty powerful. So that's a good thing. It's not such a good thing to only have 1/1 though. I think this is maybe being a little bit too skimpy on it. Most decks that I've seen Octillery in have a 2/2 line. And that will kind of play especially into one of the biggest weaknesses I see with this deck, the lack of draw power in general. Maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just not lucky enough to really work the stuff that way, but it seems to be relying an awful lot on this 1/1 Octillery here in order to stabilize its draws. Because if you have a look at the type of items that we've got here, we've got Acrobike, okay, that basically replaces itself, but it also discards a card, which in this deck is not too great. It doesn't play Ultra Ball because of the 2 discards, and Acrobite really doesn't help with that. It's nice to be able to discard an energy so you can Turbo Assault, but it's not really good synergy that way, because you're not likely to be able to discard an energy every turn, or every time you Acrobite when you only have 8 in the deck. Especially because you're probably going to be attaching at least 1 or 2 of them, at least one is most likely to be prized, so you don't have good odds of hitting an energy, and Acrobite will generally force you to discard something like a Gabite or Rare Candy or even a Garchomp, worst case scenario, and that falls into the second big problem I have with this deck, is that there is no recovery whatsoever. The way that I beat this deck when I played it, I actually was playing my Magnus and Raikou deck, so I had no right to win this because Garchomp has weakness against me. Flash Energy really helped there, because no weakness was applied, so I was able to, between that and the Assault Vest, I was able to really just completely dampen the attacks down. And I essentially just run the guy out of Garchomps, and there was nothing that he could really do to recover from that. There was no way of getting another Garchomp out, and that's a bit of a problem. It's nice that the deck has Focus Sash and Max Potion as a combination to keep your Garchomp in play. Max Potion works really well with Turbo Assault as well, because you can accelerate one of those energy back. You don't necessarily have to worry so much about discarding energy with an energy accelerant like Garchomp. Again, it also has 0 retreat cost, so you don't have to worry about being able to retreat as well. So Max Potion's a really nice item in here, but when your Garchomps inevitably do go down, you might not have enough stuff left. Especially if you had, say, a bad Sycamore at the start and you had to discard a couple of Garchomp, that's pretty much game ending. I would like to see a copy of Sacred Ash in here, as my own sort of judgment call here. You could argue Super Rod. Super Rod would probably be okay as well, but Sacred Ash is a bit more potent in this deck because of Garchomp's Turbo Assault. You don't generally need to get that many energy back into the deck, and Sacred Ash gives you 5 cards, whereas Super Rod only gives you 3. That's pretty much it. You can also search out those cards again because you have Karina, so that's kind of great. But to go back to the draw card issue, Acrobike is not something I like as a draw card. It's more just for seeing more cards in your deck, speeding up stuff that way. But I don't feel it works too well in this type of deck because you don't want to be discarding resources. If one of your artillery parts is prized or it gets knocked out, you know, your memory gets knocked out early, then you're kind of screwed in terms of draw power. So that's a bit iffy. And beyond that, it only has 2 Sycamore and 1 Judge. I'm not sure how much of a fan of Judge I personally am, but I know that it's a one-off staple in most competitive decks, so it might just be me. I personally just don't feel like 4 cards is enough, especially in a deck that plays all of its cards down like this one. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but between this and only 2 Sycamore, no Birch's Observation or Shauna, or even Giovanni's Scheme. I think Giovanni's Scheme would work pretty well in this deck, but yeah, there's just not really very many cards to draw more cards, and that's a problem. I feel like the deck might be too inconsistent with that, even though it's got stuff like 4 Trainer's Mail, which is really nice to have. And it has the Versus Seeker, so when you do play a Sycamore, you could get it back. There's no, say, Battle Compressor to get Sycamore into the discard, which would really help out, you know, to smooth out your draws. I guess it's relying a lot on Karina, but then you would wonder, why is the Remoraid line, why is the Artillery line so thin, right? That's just kind of my thing. I do like the Floatstone tech in here because I do feel if Artillery gets Lysandered and it doesn't somehow die in that turn, then being able to switch it out is really nice. It doesn't do much otherwise though, because Garchomp is really the only other thing you're putting down in most games, and it doesn't even have a retreat cost, so that's kind of a thing. I guess Lucario has one as well, but that's the only reason. Well, not the only. That's the reason why there's only one of them in here. But I don't know. I don't know if I like it that much. But it did some decent work against me in the game because Artillery being the main Pokemon that was out at the time, it was an easy sort of retreat access. But it might well just end up being a dead card. Let's be honest here. The other thing that strikes me as weird is the inclusion of Skylar. And I guess the more I'm sort of looking at it, the more I can sort of justify why it's here. But honestly, there are only 3 Karina in this deck, right? And Karina basically outdoes Skylar in a fighting deck, like all the time, right? The only thing Skylar can do that Karina cannot is search for another supporter. But in a deck like this, if you're having to search for another supporter to play, your setup is going way too slowly then. I feel like you would probably just Karina for, I mean, even if you just Karina for a Versus Seeker, you're still getting a fighting Pokemon on top of that, right? So, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, if you Karina for Versus Seeker to get Karina back next turn, you're still getting from Gible to Gabite to Garchomp within like 3 turns. Whereas Skylar for Sycamore, which you then have to discard your cards, you probably discard something really important by doing that. And it just, I don't know, it strikes me as a bit weird, especially because you can level ball for stuff, so you could even go as far as using Karina for level ball and Garchomp, and then use level ball to get Gabite, you know, go from there. Or most what I would do with it is level ball and get one of the auxiliary line, so that I could smooth out my draws that way. So Skylar just strikes me as a bit inferior here, because you're not advancing your ball position as much as you should be. So, yeah, that's kind of the way that I see this, the sort of flaws that I see within it. There's a couple of things I really do like in the deck, though, that I haven't mentioned yet. Professor's Letter is a really nice card in decks with Karina, because you can Karina for a fighting Pokemon and then Professor's Letter to get 2 energy, so that you're always attaching for every turn. That's a really nice touch. And Bridget is really good in here as well. So I play the Bridget in Magnezone Raikou, and I mentioned I might just want to play Pokemon Fan Club in there. This deck doesn't run Shaman, and it actually doesn't really run EXs except Lucario, right? Lucario you can search out with Karina, so there's no problem there. Basically, this lets you get 2 Gible and a Remoraid right from the word go. That's pretty strong when you think about it, because level ball then gets auxiliary and you've got your draw power set up. So yeah, Bridget's really good in here if you get it early in the game. And if you didn't get it early in the game but you had a Sacred Ash in your deck, then you might still be able to use Bridget and get some Gible out later, which could also be a pretty viable play. The nice thing about Garchomp is that you don't have to have a bunch of energy attached to your basics before they actually become useful when they evolve. Like, all of this line uses 1 energy, right, for attacking, even Gabite, and Gabite is not entirely useless. Like, this attack is very underwhelming, don't get me wrong, but it's not useless, because if say Zoroark is not out, then trapping something, you know, that can't really hurt you very much, or has a very expensive attack, or even an attack that can't be powered up, like say Hooper, it can be very strong. You know, you can get that 1 turn where you just stick your opponent in a really nasty spot. And yeah, not a useless attack despite the way it looks. So, now that you've heard my sort of criticisms on the deck, let's go ahead and take a look at the ways that I would change this. And they aren't particularly numerous, but I feel like they're fairly significant overall. There's really 4 changes that I've made to the deck as of right now. I don't know if Garchomp is really a good enough attacker by itself, but I have not playtested the deck, so I don't know how you would really account for matchups like Yveltal and Vespiquen, because those are the 2 that I really see being bad for Garchomp, right? Vespiquen, you have to have 2 energy attached to be able to knock it out, and it just one-shots you all the time, and it's difficult to keep up with. Yveltal EX you can knock out fine, but regular Yveltal you really can't. So that matchup, it's not an auto loss because you can Lysander around stuff, but there may be merit in trying to find some sort of partner for it. Probably not something like Raichu, but I don't really know what else you could tech against a baby Yveltal. So there is that. But changes I made, I added the 4th Karina instead of the Skylar because, like I said, I really don't see the point of the Skylar. That's something that you guys in the comments can probably tell me, because I might just not be seeing it because I'm not experienced enough, but I really don't see the point of having Skylar, so 4th Karina makes more sense to me for helping setup. And I cut the Acrobikes out entirely because I don't feel like the discard is good for this deck at all, and I added the 1 copy of Sacred Ash that I said I'd like to see, and the auxiliary line got beefed up to a 2/2. So this way, well, there's two ways that you can go about it with this. You can either have an extra auxiliary in play, which would be really cool, or you can end up prizing one of them, or having one knocked out early, and still be able to have the draw power, which is extremely important for a deck like this. So yeah, that's pretty much the only changes that I would make without further playtesting. Maybe if I tested this a bit more, I might say cut the max potion to 1 and play something else like Repeat Ball. Repeat Ball was something I was considering in this deck because it would help to search out like extra Gibbles or extra Gabites when you evolved them. That could be very powerful. Pretty much everything except Lucario has been running multiples, so that'd be nice. Speaking of Lucario, running a second one of that might not be a bad idea, because it is one of the potential draw power sources that you've got, and Lucario itself is just generally pretty powerful, so there is that. Or even just running a third fighting stadium is another choice, because one of the reasons I did beat this deck, again, apart from just running them out with running them out of Garchomp because they couldn't kill me thanks to Flash Energy, the other reason I won the game is because my Rough Sea stuck pretty much the entire time. It was really only the second last turn that it got replaced, and that healing goes a long way when you're fighting against a non-EX that you can't really do a significant amount of damage to. So maybe including a third fighting stadium or some other type of stadium, like I don't know, Parallel City might be one that you'd include a copy of, because then you could cut the opponent's bench down. There's options that way. A third stadium would be nice though, if you could find the space for it. But yeah, that's pretty much how I would change things at the moment. So I feel like this is a pretty good skeleton for discussion, especially considering it's one of the new decks that people haven't had a chance to fully establish yet. So if there's anything I've missed, or if there's anything you would want to add, feel free to leave a comment. Until next time, however, this has been GamerCow showing off a versus deck that I came across on PTCGO. And until next time, take care.